Cardinals conversations, and another week is upon us, and we get the chance to visit with the president of baseball operations for the St. Louis Cardinals, John Mozeliak. Again, this is presented by the Drury Hotels, Central Bank, and Country Bob's. And before we get into three parts of a season that are integral for the organization and for Mo, which is spring training, the trade deadline, and winter meetings, Mo, I got to ask you, how are things going for you in dealing with what we're all dealing with at this point, but how are you doing?
Doing well. Obviously, it's different, and like you and I have talked about in the past, it's adjusting to what we call this new normal. And for me, like I look at my calendar every day, and I think about where I may have been or what I would have been doing, and of course, it's different. And so, not knowing what the future schedule looks like, not knowing if I'll be traveling, not knowing what Camp 2.0 might look like. All of these things are, can create some level of anxiety. But having said that, I realize that our situation in baseball in general is still a lot better off than maybe what some of the other people in our country are dealing with right now. So I recognize that, and no, it's not normal, but adjusting.
As you can imagine, fans are so curious about just the communication and what's happening, trying to get ready if there is a spring training. What's that like on a daily basis?
Well, a couple things on the communication front. We are trying to maintain those touch points with not only our major league players and our minor league players, but also just our staff. It's as you can imagine, like a minor league coach right now is not sure what his year is going to look like. Will they play? If they don't, what does that mean? And so you're really just trying to keep people to understand and connect with them so they don't feel like they're out on that island and lost. And I would imagine that's happening all across many different industries. And so, we really are focused on that communication tree and just making sure we're connecting.
You can imagine, too, fans would be wondering, okay, there's no game, so what is a day like for John Mozeliak? So I'll ask you, what's your day like as you go into the office or work from home, whatever the case may be? What's your day like?
Well, every day is a little different. You sort of touched on a few things earlier about how we're thinking about planning and what that looks like, and so I run a lot of different financial models in terms of what it would look like if we train here or train back in Jupiter, if we train for 3 weeks versus 1 week, whether we play 81 games versus 100. What if it looks like we're minimal travel versus normal travel? All of these different scenarios are baked in. Also, we do have a draft coming, so we have to prepare for that. And of course, there's also little fires to have to put out each day. And so, I'm not finding it hard to fill 8 hours, but it's definitely different than normal. And I don't want to color it any other way. And, you're going to ask about sort of these like three key times of the year. And when we get into that, you'll realize those have like different pressure points of stress and expectation. Whereas right now, I don't feel like I'm under that because of the unknown. And so from that standpoint, it's really about just sort of trying to keep the trains running on time or keeping people where they're getting some feedback, which I think is most important. And that's what fills up my day.
The one thing I've noticed with you, whether you're doing interviews or talking to people on a personal level, you remain positive. And that's something that I think is so important, obviously, in these times. And remind people that we're going to get through this. We're going to have baseball at some point. Let's remain positive. I see you do it all the time.
Well, I certainly hope so. But in the scheme of things, it's, there's a lot of bigger things or that maybe are maybe more magnified at this point. And obviously, the health and safety of not only people in this organization, but that we connect with is on the foremost of all of our priorities. And so, hopefully we can get past that hurdle and then think about just baseball. But in the meantime, we have our fingers crossed. We are certainly hopeful that we'll see baseball, and that's what we're working towards.
Well, let's jump into these three different times in which I don't know if you get any sleep. So we'll talk about them. Pull back the curtain a little bit on this because these are fun. The winter meetings, a time that every fan in the game is excited about what you could add and trades and different things that may happen in free agency. What is it like when you show up at that hotel and you know you've got the winter meetings for 2, 3, 4 days? What's that like?
Yeah, so a couple things. First off, when you think about the off season and where what is the peak or the height of the off season? It's always winter meetings. So whether it's your fans, your media, all the attention drives what's happening at winter meetings. So when I arrive with my group, over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, I've decided to no longer stay on property. So just to get away. And part of it is just because this would be my, I think, 26 winter meetings. So the routine is can be a little bit suffocating. In other words, you can't walk through the lobby without being stopped by job seekers, agents, media. And so that becomes somewhat like worthless. So I stay off property. I tend to usually arrive around 8:30 in the morning. We tend to have like just an internal meeting first, smaller group, talk about really what we're trying to focus on, what we're trying to accomplish. And then throughout the day, we take meetings. We try to do FaceTime with agents, and then that rolls into usually a media session around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then there's usually some event at night. In my younger days, then it might mean I also end up in the hotel bar and touch base with even more people. But as I've gotten smarter, I now again I stay off property. So I tend to after dinner I leave. It doesn't mean I necessarily turn off my phone, but it's much more manageable, and I feel like the routine is easier. But one of the things that comes to mind is just expectations of winter meetings. And we go into that with a strategy. It might surprise you, but with what we're trying to accomplish and get out of it. And unfortunately, it always isn't very exciting, or it might not be what fans want to see. And every now and then we are able to do something that is a headliner and makes news, like when we traded for Ozuna. But there are also times where it's crickets, and that can be frustrating too. And it's not that we're not trying. It's not that we don't care. It's just that we just weren't able to get what we wanted to get done. And so, unfortunately, we can't publicly lay out our agenda all the time because you can't show your hand. But there is a plan every time we go into the winter meetings, and we're always trying to leave with something. And I don't think there's ever been a year I've gone to winter meetings, with the exception of maybe the first couple. And back then, you weren't allowed to bring the major league staff because if you remember after the strike year, they didn't want winter meetings to
Oh,
be
yeah.
that huge market, open market of free agency and trade. So they kind of shut that down. And those were much more like true meetings. Like you went there to do league meetings and that type of thing. And but from a trade or free agent strategy, probably ever since 98 or 99, we've always had a plan of trying to do something there. And, we've had some fun deals come out of it. And we've had some that, I think are been disappointing to our fan base, but we try.
Understood. Cardinals Conversations with John Mozeliak brought to you by Drury Hotels, Central Bank, and Country Bob's. Now, you get through the winter meetings. You got an idea who's coming to spring training for the most part. Things can change. It's fluid always. What is spring training like for you to try to say, we have this great collection of players, and we've got to pare this thing down to a 26-man roster? You had really tough decisions, at least in my opinion, at this spring training with guys that had really good springs, and some were going to go north, some weren't. So what is that like, trying to pare it down to 26?
Okay, so this is kind of a fun question and one that I'm going to answer very honestly. Spring training is probably my least stressful time of the year
Really?
because even though you make this dramatic play of you have to break camp with 26 and there's going to be some really hard decisions, and all of that's true. But what I've learned over the years is it's not what you look like on April 1st. It's what you look like on September 30th. In other words, lots of things happen. People get hurt. People don't play well. People play well. And so you're 26 men, or you're 25 for historical purposes. has always been something where I look at as very fluid. The fact that you have a 40-man roster gives you that flexibility. So I've never looked at camp as you have to necessarily have what you believe is your best 25 on day one. Now, people are going to argue with that. They're going to say that's crazy, but I'm just telling you that the way you manage that 187 days or the 162 games is really about trying to keep a pace. You're a runner. When you go out too fast, your run's not good, right? In other words, you want to be able to pace yourself. And so from a player roster standpoint, it's about pacing over that length of time, and making sure you have the right players to plug in when you need it is most important. So really what I look at over those 6 weeks is not just like what's immediately in front of me, meaning like who's playing well, who's not. He's not going to make the club because of poor performance. He's going to because he's been great. It's how can I manage it over those 187? And what can we get the most out of? And how do we optimize those 187 with the 40? That's the key.
And you lead me then to the final one, which is the trade deadline, which is fun for anybody. Well, maybe not you. Might be fun. We'll find out. But for media and fans, we're get rid of this guy, go get this guy, do this, do that. The trade deadline can be fun. I've seen you after the trade deadline, and it looks like you hadn't slept in 2 weeks. You may not have. So what is it like, the trade deadline from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a fun topic too, and one that on any given year can be very different. But there have been a couple trading deadlines where there are a couple sleepless nights. I think back to the Lackey trade, and at the time we were doing this, it was roughly 1 a.m. San Diego time, and I'm trying to talk to Ben Charrington to
Right.
say, do we have a deal or not? And he was not able to get a hold of John, so we couldn't confirm anything, and we kept going back and forth. I had the agent on the phone going, look, I just need to know that he's going to be okay with this deal. Anyway, long story short, we kept going back and forth. I think Ben and I each got an hour of sleep just to try to get some. And then, I get a phone call at 6 a.m. And then we're basically trying to nail down this deal. And then, as you may remember, went into the clubhouse, and unfortunately ESPN broke the deal. And so Joe Kelly and Alan Craig were not all too pleased to see me. And that matter, even a couple of the coaches and manager at the time. So, but it's always hard when you trade people. Like a lot of things that people don't realize about this job is we actually like the players. Like you get to know it. There's relationships, and trading players is my least favorite part of this job. And I think to the average fan, when they hear about trades, they get excited, or they dream up their own, and that part is exciting, but it's tough telling someone they're leaving, and especially someone that likes being here or someone that has history here. And I always tell people baseball's a really interesting business because very few people leave this game the way they want to. They're usually told, and it's a lot of how you feel like with a trade. So when you tell someone they're moving on, or you're in essence saying I'm giving up because I think I can do better, it's not an easy message. And so probably my least favorite part of the business is the trading world, but it's a part of the business, and you have to be active in it.
That's what's got to be so tough with you. As you mentioned, we're all human beings. We have relationships. There's the human element to that. And to go tell somebody that they're gone, that can't be easy. I would imagine that's got to be a very, very tough part of it. As you said, the toughest part of your job.
Yeah, and I think like think back to when you draft a player, you sign a player. You think you're telling them that at some point I might trade you? Of course not.
Right.
You're telling them that, look, this is a great opportunity. The Cardinals like to promote fast. You play well, you move. And then there's that time where we need to add something to that major league club, and we have to trade one of our young talent. And it's not easy, but it's even harder when you actually know the major league player that you're doing, because you have that relationship. So as I've always stated, it's the least fun of the job, but it's part of the job.
Mo, this is great. Fun stuff. And you're pulling back the curtain. I know the fans enjoy that as well. Stay safe, stay healthy, and fingers crossed. You're Mr. Positive. I am too. Let's have baseball at some point this year. Thanks for doing this.
I hope so, Danny. Thanks, buddy.